In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Among the countless threats that assail humanity from every corner of the galaxy, few inspire such primal terror as the Tyranids. These Xenos creatures arrive not as conquerors seeking territory or raiders hunting plunder, but as an all-consuming hunger made manifest. They are the great devourer, a tide of chitinous horror that strips worlds bare of all biological matter, leaving nothing but lifeless rock in their wake. Against such an implacable foe, one might expect that only the mightiest of the Emperor's warriors could stand defiant. The genetically enhanced Space Marines, with their transhuman physiology, the towering Imperial Knights, with their god machines of war, or perhaps the endless regiments of the Astra Militarum, drowning the enemy in bodies and lass fire. Yet, there exists a force that strikes a particular kind of dread into the psyche of the hive mind itself, a group of warriors who possess no genetic enhancements, no towering war engines, and no numerical superiority over the swarms they face. They are the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, and they are perhaps the most dangerous foe a Tyranid hive fleet can encounter. To the uninitiated, this might seem impossible. How could human women, no matter how well trained or equipped, pose a greater threat to the Tyranids than the Emperor's finest Space Marines? The answer lies not in the strength of their arms or the power of their armor, but in something far more dangerous to a creature of the warp and flesh. The Sisters of Battle wield faith itself as a weapon, and in doing so, they exploit fundamental weaknesses in the Tyranid species that other Imperial forces cannot. The Tyranids are a race entirely dependent on psychic coordination. Every action, every movement, every tactical decision flows from the Gestalt consciousness known as the hive mind through specialized creatures called synapse organisms. This psychic network is both their greatest strength and their most critical vulnerability. The Sisters of Battle, through their unshakable faith in the God Emperor of mankind, manifest powers that operate entirely outside the normal rules of the warp, making them uniquely suited to disrupting this network in ways that baffle the alien intelligence directing the swarms. But the Sisters' effectiveness against the Tyranids goes far deeper than simple psychic resistance. Their tactical doctrine, their weapons, their very philosophy of war seems tailor-made to counter the specific threats posed by bio-horrors from beyond the galactic rim. Where other Imperial forces might falter in the face of creatures specifically evolved to counter their strengths, the Sisters of Battle present challenges that the hive mind's adaptive capabilities struggle to overcome. Consider the fundamental nature of both forces. The Tyranids operate through cold, calculated evolution, adapting their organisms to counter specific threats through biological modification. They are creatures of pure pragmatism, evolving weapons and defenses based on empirical data fed back to the hive fleet through consumption of genetic material and battlefield experience. They understand lass fire, bolter shells, and even the psychic powers of enemy psychers. These are quantifiable threats that can be analyzed and countered. But how does one evolve a defense against miracles? How does an intelligence built on biological supremacy counter warriors, whose very presence seems to bend the laws of reality through sheer force of belief? The acts of faith performed by the Sisters of Battle are not psychic powers that can be measured, analyzed, or countered through conventional means. They are manifestations of divine will, or at least phenomena so thoroughly outside the hive mind's frame of reference that it cannot adequately respond to them. Throughout the long history of conflict between the Imperium and the Tyranid threat, there have been numerous instances where Sisters of Battle have achieved victories that defied all tactical logic. Canoness Praxedes of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, for instance, single-handedly slew a hive tyrant in mortal combat, even after receiving wounds that should have instantly killed her. The fury of her counterattack, driven by faith and martyrdom, broke an entire Tyranid assault and allowed thousands to evacuate the doomed world of Ocassis. This was not the victory of superior genetics or advanced technology, but of something the hive mind fundamentally does not comprehend. The Tyranids evolved to consume the galaxy, They have adapted to counter every major threat they have encountered, from the reality-warping powers of the Eldar to the necrodermis bodies of the Necrons. They have overcome hive worlds defended by billions of Imperial guardsmen and weathered the fury of entire Space Marine chapters. Yet when they face the Sisters of Battle in significant numbers, they encounter a phenomenon that their entire evolutionary framework is ill-equipped to handle. This is the story of why the Tyranids, for all their adaptive evolution and overwhelming numbers, have learned to fear the sight of black power armor trimmed in crimson and gold. This is the account of battles where faith proved mightier than evolution, where hymns of devotion drowned out the psychic screams of the hive mind, and where the flames of purity reduced bio-horrors to ash faster than the hive fleets could replace them. The Sisters of Battle stand as proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, faith is not merely comfort for the fearful. It is a weapon of terrible power, and when wielded by warriors trained from childhood in its use, it can break even the most alien of foes. The Tyranids have consumed entire civilizations, devoured worlds beyond counting, and adapted to overcome nearly every challenge the galaxy has thrown at them. But they have not adapted to faith, and that failure may ultimately prove their undoing when they face the daughters of the Emperor. Understanding the Great Devourer. To comprehend why the Sisters of Battle are so effective against the Tyranids, one must first understand the nature of the enemy they face. The Tyranids are not merely another Xenos species to be catalogued and exterminated. They represent something far more terrifying, an extragalactic threat whose origins lie beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way galaxy itself. Where they came from remains a mystery, but what they seek is brutally simple: the consumption of all biological matter in the universe. The Tyranids do not conquer worlds in any traditional sense. They do not seek to rule over conquered populations, extract resources for industrial production, or spread an ideology. Instead, they arrive in massive bioships that darken the stars themselves, descending upon planets like a plague of locusts upon a field of grain. Every living thing on a world targeted by a Tyranid hive fleet is consumed, broken down into its base components, and recycled into new Tyranid organisms or fuel for the fleet's continued journey. When the Tyranids depart, they leave behind dead worlds, stripped even of their atmospheres, barren rocks that will never again support life. This horrifying efficiency is made possible by the most defining characteristic of the Tyranid species, the hive mind. Unlike other Xenos races, where individual members possess independent thoughts and motivations, Tyranids are part of a vast psychic gestalt consciousness that encompasses the entire species. Every Tyranid organism, from the smallest ripper to the mightiest hive tyrant, is but a single cell in a galaxy-spanning superorganism. The hive mind directs them all with an intelligence so vast and alien that human minds cannot fully comprehend its nature. The hive mind is not simply a form of telepathic communication or shared consciousness. It is a psychic phenomenon of such magnitude that it literally distorts the fabric of reality around Tyranid hive fleets. As a fleet approaches a target world, this psychic presence manifests as what Imperial scholars call the shadow in the warp, a suffocating blanket of alien thought that drowns out all other psychic communication. Astropaths find themselves unable to send messages through the warp. Navigators discover their ability to guide ships through the Imperium, compromised or destroyed entirely. Even non-psychic individuals begin to experience a creeping sense of doom and despair as the shadow descends upon them. For psychers, those unfortunate souls gifted or cursed with the ability to manipulate the energies of the warp, the approach of a hive fleet is utterly nightmarish. The hive mind's psychic presence is so overwhelming that attempting to use psychic powers in its vicinity can lead to immediate death or madness. The horrors that a psyker experiences when touching the thoughts of the hive mind are said to be beyond description, a cacophony of alien, hunger, and inhuman intelligence that shatters sanity like glass. Many psykers have been driven permanently insane merely from attempting to probe the thoughts of approaching Tyranid forces. Others have died on the spot, their brains unable to process the utterly foreign nature of the hive mind's consciousness. This psychic dominance serves multiple purposes for the Tyranids. It prevents their prey from calling for help, trapping entire worlds in isolation as the swarms descend. It cripples the abilities of enemy psykers who might otherwise prove dangerous to the invasion. And most importantly, it serves as the mechanism through which the hive mind controls its countless organisms. On the battlefield, this control is exercised through specialized bioforms known as synapse creatures. These larger, more complex organisms serve as nodes in the hive mind's psychic network, relaying commands to the smaller, simpler creatures that make up the bulk of a Tyranid swarm. Hive tyrants, Tyranid warriors, zoanthropes, and other synapse creatures project an aura of psychic control that keeps nearby organisms functioning as coordinated parts of a greater whole. Under the influence of synapse, even the simplest Tyranid organisms display tactical sophistication and fearless determination, advancing into enemy fire without hesitation and coordinating their attacks with eerie precision. However, this reliance on psychic control creates a fundamental vulnerability in the Tyranid species. When synapse creatures are killed, the lesser organisms they were controlling are severed from the guiding intelligence of the hive mind. Cut off from higher direction, these creatures revert to their base instincts, becoming little more than savage animals, driven by hunger and self-preservation. This phenomenon is known as instinctive behavior, and it represents the Tyranid's greatest tactical weakness. A swarm that loses its synapse creatures transforms from a coordinated military force into a disorganized mob. Some organisms, following the lurk instinct, attempt to flee from danger or seek cover, essentially removing themselves from the battle. Others, driven by the hunt instinct, become so fixated on the nearest prey that they lose all tactical awareness, charging headlong into prepared positions or ignoring more strategically important targets. Most dangerous to the Tyranids themselves are those afflicted by the feed instinct, as these creatures may actually turn on each other in a cannibalistic frenzy, tearing apart their own kind in a desperate need to consume biomass. This is not merely a minor inconvenience for a Tyranid force. Historical battle records show numerous instances where the loss of key synapse creatures has led to the complete collapse of Tyranid assaults. Entire swarms have been seen devouring themselves or fleeing in panic after targeted strikes eliminated the hive tyrants and warriors coordinating them. The disciplined wall of chitin and claws becomes a chaotic melee of confused organisms, easy prey for determined Imperial defenders. The hive mind is aware of this vulnerability and takes steps to mitigate it. Hive fleets deploy redundant synapse coverage, ensuring that multiple synapse creatures overlap their areas of control. Synapse organisms are often positioned in relatively protected locations, surrounded by screens of lesser creatures or given adaptive evolutions that enhance their survivability. Some Tyranid invasions have even seen the evolution of additional synapse capabilities in organisms that previously lacked them, demonstrating the hive mind's ability to adapt to the targeting of these critical bioforms. Yet despite these adaptations, the fundamental weakness remains. The Tyranids cannot function effectively without their synapse network, and any force capable of systematically dismantling that network can break even the largest swarm. This is where the Sisters of Battle enter the equation, because their combination of precision firepower, tactical discipline, and faith-granted powers makes them exceptionally suited to hunting and killing synapse creatures. The shadow in the warp, that terrible psychic presence that cripples psykers and drives ordinary humans to despair, has virtually no effect on the Sisters of Battle. Their faith protects them from the worst of its influence, allowing them to maintain morale and coordination even as other Imperial forces begin to crumble under the psychological weight of the hive mind's attention. Where an Astra Militarum regiment might break and run as the shadow descends, and even Space Marines might find their librarians compromised, the Sisters of Battle stand firm, their hymns of devotion drowning out the psychic screams of alien hunger. This immunity to the Tyranids' primary psychological weapon fundamentally changes the nature of engagements involving the Adepta Sororitas. The hive mind cannot soften them up with terror and despair before the physical assault begins. It cannot disrupt their coordination through psychic interference. And most critically, it cannot prevent their leaders and warriors from performing acts of faith, those miraculous manifestations of divine power that fall completely outside the hive mind's understanding of how reality functions. The Tyranids evolved to dominate the psychic battlefield. They evolved to terrify their prey and break their will to resist. They evolved to adapt to every known threat in the galaxy. But they did not evolve to face an enemy whose greatest weapons operate on principles that the hive mind cannot even comprehend, let alone counter. The faith that burns brighter than stars. In the arsenal of the Imperium of man, there exist countless weapons of war. Plasma weapons that burn with the fury of captured stars. Chainswords that tear through armor and flesh with equal ease. Macro cannons capable of reducing cities to rubble. Yet among all these tools of destruction, few are as feared by the Mao, enemies of mankind, as the unwavering faith of the Adepta Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle are unique among the military forces of the Imperium, in that their combat effectiveness does not derive primarily from genetic enhancement or technological superiority, but from an absolute, unshakable belief in the divinity of the God Emperor of mankind. This is not the casual faith of the average imperial citizen, offering prayers for protection while going about their daily lives. Nor is it the ritualized devotion of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who worship the Omnissiah through technological liturgies. The faith of the Sisters of Battle is a living weapon, a force of will so intense that it manifests as genuine miracles upon the battlefield. From the moment they are inducted into the Schola Progenium as orphans, the future Sisters of Battle are immersed in religious indoctrination so comprehensive that it becomes the very foundation of their identity. They do not merely believe in the Emperor's divinity as a matter of theology. They know it with the same certainty that they know their own existence. Every waking moment of their training is dedicated to honing both their martial prowess and their spiritual purity. Combat drills and weapon practice are interspersed with hours of prayer and meditation. The study of battle tactics goes hand in hand with the memorization of holy texts. For the Sisters, there is no separation between the spiritual and the martial. Faith and warfare are two sides of the same coin. This absolute devotion manifests on the battlefield in ways that defy rational explanation. When a Sister of Battle calls upon the Emperor in her moment of greatest need, reality itself seems to bend in response. These manifestations are known as acts of faith, and they are perhaps the single most distinctive and powerful ability possessed by the Adepta Sororitas. Unlike the psychic powers wielded by librarians, sanctioned psychers, and enemy sorcerers, acts of faith are not drawn from the warp. They do not channel the Imperium's chaotic energies or invoke demonic entities. Instead, they appear to be expressions of the Emperor's will made manifest, miracles that occur precisely when they are needed most. The mechanics of acts of faith are fascinating to witness, though their true nature remains a mystery even to the most learned scholars of the Imperium. Each battle engaged by the Sisters of Battle builds what they call miracle dice, a reserve of divine favor that accumulates through acts of devotion and martyrdom. When a battle sister dies in service to the Emperor, her sacrifice strengthens the faith of her surviving sisters. When a unit holds an objective against overwhelming odds, their steadfast defense is rewarded with the Emperor's blessing. When a simulacrum imperialis, a sacred banner depicting the Emperor's visage, is carried into battle, it channels additional divine power to the surrounding warriors. These miracle dice can then be expended to perform acts of faith, allowing the sisters to achieve feats that would be impossible through mortal skill alone. A sister superior might call upon the Emperor to guide her shots, and every bolt from her weapon finds its mark with uncanny accuracy. A squad of battle sisters surrounded by Tyranid hormagaunts might invoke divine protection, and the chitinous claws that should tear them apart instead glance harmlessly off their armor. A wounded canoness, her body broken and bleeding, might draw upon her faith to deliver one final perfect strike that fells an enemy champion. What makes acts of faith particularly devastating against Tyranids is that they operate on principles completely foreign to the hive mind. The Tyranids have encountered psychers before. Indeed, they have evolved specific bioforms like lictors and lictor assassin variants to hunt and kill enemy psychers. They understand the mechanics of warp-based powers and have developed both tactical and evolutionary responses to them. Zoanthropes can engage in psychic duels with enemy psychers. Venomthropes secrete spores that interfere with psychic abilities. The shadow in the warp itself serves as a massive psychic countermeasure. But acts of faith are not psychic powers. They draw on no energy from the warp that the Tyranids can detect or counter. They manifest no psychic signatures that synapse creatures can identify and respond to. To the hive mind, these miracles must appear as random fluctuations in probability, inexplicable events that violate the normal functioning of cause and effect. A sister of battle, who should by all physical laws be dead from her wounds, continues fighting. A volley of bolter fire that should scatter across a wide area instead concentrates with perfect precision on a single synapse creature. A charge that should fail due to distance somehow succeeds against all probability. The hive mind can analyze and counter tactics. It can evolve defenses against specific weapons. It can predict enemy movements based on observed patterns of behavior. But it cannot predict or counter miracles. And so, when facing the Sisters of Battle, the Tyranids find themselves confronted by an enemy that consistently defies their tactical predictions in ways that seem to have no logical explanation. Complementing the acts of faith is another manifestation of the Sisters' devotion, the Shield of Faith. Every Sister of Battle carries with her an absolute conviction that the Emperor watches over her, that her faith will protect her from harm. And remarkably, it does. The Shield of Faith manifests as a tangible form of protection, granting the Sisters resistance to wounds that would kill lesser warriors. Battle Sisters have been documented shrugging off plasma fire that should have vaporized them, walking through lass fire that would cut down ordinary soldiers, and even resisting the withering acid of Tyranid bioweapons that dissolve ceramite armor. More importantly for combat against Tyranids, the Shield of Faith provides protection against psychic attacks. While other Imperial forces might suffer from the psychological pressure of the shadow in the warp, the Sisters of Battle remain largely immune. Their faith shields their minds from the alien hunger that radiates from the hive mind. Where others experience crushing despair and existential dread, the Sisters feel only righteous fury and determination to purge the Xenos threat. This immunity to psychological warfare cannot be overstated in its importance. The Tyranids rely heavily on breaking the morale of their enemies before the physical assault even begins. They count on the shadow in the warp to soften up defenders, making them fearful and disorganized. They expect their horrifying appearance and overwhelming numbers to inspire panic. When facing the Sisters of Battle, these tactics fail utterly. The Sisters look upon the approaching swarms with not fear, but contempt. They see not invincible monsters, but merely another Xenos species that dares to defy the Emperor's dominion over the galaxy. The sacred rites performed by the Sisters before and during battle further enhance their effectiveness. Unlike many Imperial forces that might recite prayers as a formality or for morale purposes, the Sisters' devotions have genuine power. When they consecrate their weapons before battle, those arms seem to strike with greater force and accuracy. When they chant hymns while advancing into enemy fire, their steps become more certain and their aim more true. When a hospitaller performs rites of healing over a wounded sister, recovery occurs faster than medical science alone would predict. These rites are not mere superstition or psychological comfort. There is something genuinely supernatural occurring, though whether it represents the Emperor's direct intervention, the collective psychic potential of humanity expressing itself through focused belief, or some other mechanism entirely remains unknown. What matters is that they work, and they work consistently enough that the Adepta Sororitas builds its entire tactical doctrine around them. The effectiveness of faith as a weapon extends beyond mere defensive capabilities or accuracy enhancements. The Sisters of Battle are also capable of manifesting their faith in ways that actively harm their enemies. Purifying flames burst from their weapons with greater intensity than physics alone would suggest. Holy icons cause Tyranid organisms to recoil as if in pain. The mere presence of particularly faithful sisters seems to weaken the psychic bonds that hold Tyranid swarms together. There are also the living saints, sisters whose faith burns so brightly that they transcend normal mortality. Saint Celestine is perhaps the most famous example, a warrior who has died and returned to life multiple times through the power of faith alone. When a living saint manifests on a battlefield facing Tyranids, the results are devastating. These paragons of faith emit an aura of divine power that strengthens nearby sisters, while simultaneously disrupting the hive mind's control over its organisms. Tyranid attacks that should overwhelm through sheer weight of numbers find themselves faltering in the face of a single individual whose presence seems to defy everything the hive mind understands about reality. The Tyranids have evolved countermeasures for nearly every threat they have encountered. They have adapted to resist the Necron's Gauss weapons. They have developed defenses against elder psychic powers. They have even learned to counter the specialized ammunition of the Adeptus Astartes. But they cannot evolve a defense against faith, because faith operates on principles that evolution cannot address. No amount of biological adaptation can counter a phenomenon that exists partially or entirely outside the physical universe. This is why the Sisters of Battle represent such a unique threat to Tyranid hive fleets. Every other Imperial force, no matter how effective, operates within parameters that the hive mind can understand and eventually counter. The Sisters of Battle operate on principles that the hive mind cannot even comprehend, wielding weapons against which the Great Devourer has no defense. The psychic paradox, one of the most critical advantages the Sisters of Battle possess when facing Tyranids, lies in a counterintuitive fact: they are not psychic. In most engagements, the absence of psychic capability might be seen as a disadvantage. Against chaos forces that warp reality, or elder warlocks who bend the warp to their will, psychic powers represent a crucial dimension of warfare. The Imperium's own librarians and sanctioned psychers provide invaluable battlefield support through their abilities. Yet against the Tyranids, the Sisters' complete lack of psychic potential becomes a tremendous asset. To understand why requires examining how the shadow in the warp functions. This psychic phenomenon is not simply a broad area of psychic interference. It is a targeted weapon that specifically affects beings with psychic potential. When a hive fleet approaches a world, Imperial astropaths attempting to send warnings find themselves unable to reach their intended recipients. This is not due to simple jamming or interference, but because the shadow causes physical pain and mental anguish to anyone attempting to use psychic powers within its area of effect. Sanctioned psychers report feeling as though their minds are being crushed by an enormous pressure. Unsanctioned psychers, those unfortunate individuals with untrained abilities, frequently die outright as their minds are overwhelmed. For Space Marine librarians, who represent some of the Imperium's most powerful combat psychers, the shadow in the warp presents a severe tactical problem. Their psychic abilities, which would normally provide force multiplication effects like precognition, enhanced combat prowess, or battlefield control powers, become unreliable at best and actively dangerous at worst. A librarian attempting to manifest a psychic power while under the shadow in the warp risks suffering perils of the warp, where the unstable energies they are attempting to manipulate backfire catastrophically. This can result in the psyker's death, collateral damage to nearby friendly units, or even the opening of temporary warp rifts. The Adepta Sororita suffer none of these problems. Their acts of faith, while superficially similar to psychic powers in their miraculous effects, do not draw upon the warp and therefore cannot be disrupted by the shadow. When a canoness calls upon the Emperor to guide her bolter's aim, there is no psychic energy for the hive mind to interfere with. When a squad of battle sisters invokes divine protection, there is no spell to be counterspelled or disrupted. The shadow in the warp, that terrible weapon that cripples the Imperium's psychic defenders, is completely ineffective against the faith-based abilities of the sisters. This creates a fascinating tactical dynamic. While other Imperial forces find their capabilities diminished by the approach of a hive fleet, the Sisters of Battle remain at full effectiveness. In fact, one could argue they become relatively more powerful as the shadow intensifies, since their faith-based abilities work perfectly, while any enemy psykers or allied Imperial psykers find themselves compromised. In battles where the Sisters fight alongside other Imperial forces, they often become the most reliable component of the army once the Tyranid shadow begins to manifest. There is also evidence, though not conclusively proven, that acts of faith may actually be harmful to the hive mind's psychic network in ways that conventional attacks are not. Some battlefield reports describe Tyranid swarms becoming disoriented or confused when confronted by particularly intense displays of faith, as if the divine manifestations somehow interfere with synaptic control. Canoness Praxides' final battle provides a compelling example. When she struck down the hive tyrant despite mortal wounds, the Tyranid swarm did not simply lose coordination, as would normally occur when a synapse creature dies. Instead, they actively turned on each other in confusion, suggesting that the faith-empowered nature of the killing blow had somehow sent a disruptive shockwave through the local synaptic web. The scholarly debate over whether acts of faith represent genuine divine intervention or some form of psychic phenomenon that simply operates on different principles than warp-based powers is irrelevant to the practical question of battlefield effectiveness. What matters is that these abilities work. They work consistently, and they cannot be countered by the Tyranid's anti-psychic capabilities. Consider the tactical implications of this immunity. When Space Marines engage Tyranids, they must carefully manage their librarian's psychic powers, balancing the potential benefits against the very real risks posed by the shadow in the warp. Attempting to manifest powers becomes a calculated gamble that can backfire spectacularly. This forces Space Marine commanders to either accept the risk or fight without one of their force multipliers. The Sisters of Battle face no such dilemma. Their canonesses and Celestians can call upon acts of faith freely, without fear of catastrophic failure or psychic backlash. This allows them to employ their faith-based abilities aggressively and frequently, using miracle dice to ensure critical shots hit their marks, invoking divine protection at crucial moments, and generally operating at a level of tactical flexibility that other Imperial forces cannot match when the shadow in the warp is present. Furthermore, the Sisters possess the ability to resist and even negate enemy psychic powers through what they call deny the witch tests. While many Imperial units possess some degree of psychic resistance, the Sisters' Shield of Faith grants them exceptional capabilities in this regard. When Tyranid zoanthropes attempt to unleash psychic lances of energy, when hive tyrants try to enfeeble enemy units with psychic curses, the Sisters can often simply refuse to allow these powers to affect them through sheer force of faith. This creates a situation where the Tyranid's psychic dominance, usually one of their greatest advantages, becomes irrelevant or even counterproductive. The shadow in the warp that should be weakening the enemy instead has no effect. The psychic powers that should be supporting the swarm are denied by faith-based resistance, The hive mind finds itself fighting an enemy that simply does not engage on the psychic battlefield at all, rendering an entire dimension of Tyranid warfare useless. Even more fascinating is the effect that particularly holy relics and sanctified equipment have on Tyranid organisms. Reports from multiple battlefields describe Tyranid creatures recoiling from ecclesiastical iconography, seemingly pained by proximity to symbols of the imperial creed. While the mechanism behind this is unclear, the practical effect is undeniable. Holy icons carried by palatines and canonesses appear to weaken the synaptic bonds controlling nearby Tyranid organisms. Blessed weapons strike with greater force against Tyranid chitin. Sanctified armor turns aside bioweapons with greater effectiveness than the armor's physical properties alone would suggest. There is a particular incident documented from the defense of the shrine world of Holos Borealis that illustrates this phenomenon dramatically. A squad of battle sisters from the Order of the Sacred Rose found themselves surrounded by Tyranid warriors, synapse creatures that should have coordinated a swift annihilation of the isolated squad. However, the squad's sister superior carried a simulacrum imperialis, depicting the martyrdom of Saint Arabella. As the Tyranid warriors closed in, witnesses reported that the creatures seemed to struggle against an invisible force, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated despite being well within synapse range of each other. The sisters used this momentary disruption to eliminate 2 of the warriors with precisely targeted bolter fire, causing the remaining creatures to lose synaptic cohesion entirely and flee the battlefield. The Necron cryptex Xerus, one of the galaxy's foremost experts on studying other species, has reportedly attempted to analyze acts of faith and their effects. According to fragmentary accounts, even this ancient intellect, with access to technology millions of years advanced beyond that of the Imperium, cannot explain how these manifestations function. They appear to violate fundamental laws of physics, yet clearly produce measurable results. For the hive mind, which relies on understanding and adapting to threats through evolutionary processes, an enemy that operates on incomprehensible principles is the worst possible opponent. This is the psychic paradox of the Sisters of Battle. By being completely non-psychic, they become immune to the Tyranids' greatest psychic weapon. By wielding faith instead of warp power, they achieve effects that the hive mind cannot counter or even properly analyze. In a galaxy where psychic dominance often determines the outcome of battles, the sisters prove that absolute faith can be more powerful than any psychic ability. Fire, the great purifier. Among the sacred trinity of weapons favored by the Adepta Sororitas, the flamer holds a special place of honor. While the bolter delivers the Emperor's judgment and the melter brings his wrath, it is the flamer that enacts his purification. For the Sisters of Battle, fire is not merely a tool of war, it is a symbol of spiritual cleansing, a manifestation of the Emperor's holy light made tangible. Against Tyranids, this emphasis on flame weapons proves devastatingly effective. The Tyranids, for all their adaptive evolution and horrifying resilience, possess a fundamental weakness to fire. This vulnerability exists on multiple levels, from the simple physical effects of burning to the deeper strategic implications of biomass denial. Understanding why fire is so effective requires examining both Tyranid biology and the mechanisms by which hive fleets sustain themselves. At the most basic level, Tyranid organisms are carbon-based life forms covered in chitinous armor. While this armor provides excellent protection against projectile weapons and even many energy weapons, it offers comparatively little defense against sustained exposure to high temperatures. The chitin can char and crack under intense heat, exposing the softer tissues beneath. The various synaptic fluids and biological compounds that allow Tyranid organisms to function begin to break down at temperatures well within the range of standard imperial flamers. But the effectiveness of fire against Tyranids goes far beyond simply burning individual organisms. The true power of flame as an anti-Tyranid weapon lies in its ability to deny the hive fleet the biomass it needs to continue functioning. Every Tyranid creature killed by conventional means represents recycled material for the swarm. The bodies of the fallen are consumed by rippers and other reclamation organisms, broken down into constituent compounds, and either fed directly to other Tyranid creatures or transported back to the hive ships for processing. This creates a situation where even a victorious defense might ultimately serve the Tyranids' goals, as they recover some percentage of the biomass invested in the assault. Fire fundamentally disrupts this equation. A Tyranid organism, reduced to ash, cannot be reclaimed. The complex proteins and organic compounds that make it up are broken down into simple molecules that provide no nutritional value to the hive fleet. By systematically cremating Tyranid casualties, Imperial forces can deny the invaders the very sustenance they need to continue their campaign. This is why the Adepta Sororitas makes it standard practice to burn Tyranid corpses whenever possible, even at the cost of diverting resources from the immediate battle. The Sisters of Battle have refined this doctrine to a level of tactical sophistication that other Imperial forces rarely match. A typical Sororitas battle plan against Tyranids will include designated cleansing units, whose specific role is to incinerate Tyranid casualties behind the advancing battle line. Heavy flamer-equipped Retributor squads are positioned to maximize their coverage of likely Tyranid approach vectors. Dominion squads with flamers scout ahead to identify and eliminate small Tyranid organisms before they can mature into more dangerous forms. Even individual battle sisters carry Prometheum charges for purifying ground after engagements. This tactical emphasis on fire creates a cumulative effect that becomes more pronounced as battles progress, where a traditional Imperial force fighting Tyranids might find themselves facing ever larger swarms as the hive fleet recycles its losses. Battles involving significant Sororitas forces often see the reverse. Each wave of Tyranids emerges slightly weaker than the last, as the biomass consumed by flames is lost to the swarm forever. Over the course of extended campaigns, this attrition can reach critical levels, forcing hive fleets to divert additional resources or even abandon assaults that are no longer sustainable. The Order of the Valorous Heart, one of the major orders militant, has taken this doctrine to its logical extreme. Their battle sisters carry flame weapons with such frequency that their forces often appear as moving walls of purifying fire. They have developed specialized tactics around what they call the cleansing advance, where squads equipped with flamers create overlapping fields of fire that no Tyranid organism can pass through intact. This approach has proven so effective that several Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos have specifically requested the Order of the Valorous Heart when coordinating planetary defenses against Tyranid incursions. There is also psychological and spiritual significance to the use of fire that should not be discounted. For the Sisters of Battle, purifying flames represent the Emperor's judgment made manifest. The act of burning Xenos corruption is not merely tactically sound, it is a sacred duty that reinforces the spiritual purity of the warriors performing it. This creates a positive feedback loop, where the Sisters' faith is strengthened by their actions, which in turn makes their acts of faith more potent, which further empowers their combat effectiveness. The Tyranids have attempted to evolve counters to this weakness, of course. Some hive fleets have produced organisms with enhanced thermal resistance, thickened chitin shells that can better withstand flame. Others have developed bioweapons that spray suppressant chemicals to extinguish Prometheum fires. There are even reports of specialized Tyranid organisms that can rapidly consume their own dead, processing the biomass before flames can reduce it to ash. Yet these adaptations always seem to prove insufficient against Sororitas forces. The reason for this failure lies partly in the sheer variety and intensity of flame weapons employed by the Sisters. Standard flamers, heavy flamers, inferno pistols, hand flamers, even specialized incendiary ammunition for bolters. The Sororitas employ flame in such diverse forms and at such various ranges that evolving a comprehensive defense becomes nearly impossible. Adaptations that work against one form of flame weapon prove inadequate against others. Organisms that can resist the sustained burn of heavy flamers still succumb to the instant vaporization of melter weapons. Creatures that develop chemical fire suppressants find themselves vulnerable to blessed promethium that burns through supernatural means. Furthermore, the sisters continuously modify and consecrate their promethium fuel supplies through sacred rituals. While the exact nature of these rites is known only to the orders themselves, the practical effect is that sororitas flame weapons often burn hotter and longer than identical equipment used by other Imperial forces. Some blessed promethium has been reported to burn even underwater or in vacuum, clearly violating normal physical laws. The hive mind's attempts to adapt to conventional flame weapons prove useless against these sanctified flames. The Battle of the Thresh system provides an excellent example of fire's strategic importance in anti-Tyranid warfare. When a tendril of Hive Fleet Ouroboros entered the system, they found the Order of the Bloody Rose already deployed on the Sol planet, having been guided there by divine visions received by Sister Assumpta. The sisters arrayed themselves across the barren world and waited for the Tyranids to descend. When the swarms finally made planetfall, they encountered a defense that centered entirely around fire and faith. Heavy flamer teams established overlapping kill zones. Immolator tanks created corridors of flame. Individual battle sisters armed with hand flamers moved through the melee, ensuring every fallen Tyranid was incinerated before it could be reclaimed. The battle raged for hours, with both sides suffering tremendous casualties. However, the critical difference was that the sisters ensured every Tyranid corpse was reduced to ash, denying the Hive fleet any opportunity to recycle its losses. As the waves of Tyranid organisms grew progressively weaker, the sisters' faith paradoxically grew stronger, fueled by their success in purifying the Xenos threat. By the battle's end, the Tyranid assault had been completely broken. The biomass they had invested in the attack lost forever to cleansing flames. This incident and others like it have not gone unnoticed by the Hive mind. There is evidence from captured synaptic communications that Hive fleets actively attempt to avoid engaging Sisters of Battle when possible, recognizing them as an inefficient target. The biomass cost of assaulting sororitas positions, combined with the minimal biomass reclamation from such battles, makes Sisters of Battle a poor choice of prey from the Tyranids' perspective. This is perhaps the ultimate validation of the flame-based tactical doctrine. The Tyranids, creatures known for their relentless advance and consumption of all life, actually prefer to avoid battle with the Emperor's most devoted daughters. Breaking the synaptic web. The synaptic web is simultaneously the Tyranids' greatest strength and their most critical vulnerability. Every Tyranid organism, from the smallest ripper to the mightiest bio-titan, is connected to the Hive mind through this psychic network. Through synapse, the Hive mind coordinates swarms numbering in the billions with perfect precision, adapts to changing battlefield conditions in real time, and ensures that its forces function as a single unified organism rather than a chaotic mob. Yet this very reliance on psychic coordination creates an exploitable weakness, and the Sisters of Battle have refined the art of exploiting it to a level that few other Imperial forces can match. Understanding how to break the synaptic web requires first understanding how it functions. The Hive mind does not directly control every organism in a swarm. Such would be impossible even for an intelligence of its magnitude. Instead, it works through a hierarchy of control. At the top are the largest synapse creatures, Hive tyrants and swarm lords, which maintain direct psychic communion with the Hive mind and coordinate the broadest aspects of the swarm's strategy. Below them are medium-sized synapse creatures like Tyranid warriors and Tyranid primes, which focus the Hive mind's will into more localized tactical decisions. Finally, specialized synapse organisms like zoanthropes and neurothropes serve as psychic amplifiers, extending the range and intensity of synaptic control. These synapse creatures project overlapping spheres of psychic influence, typically with a radius of about 12 inches in tactical terms. though this can vary based on the organism's power and any environmental factors. Within these spheres, lesser Tyranid organisms function at peak efficiency, coordinated by the hive mind's vast intelligence. They move with purpose, coordinate their attacks, and respond to changing tactical situations with an effectiveness that belies their simple biology. Remove the synapse control, however, and these same organisms revert to base animals driven by instinct rather than intelligence. The Sisters of Battle exploit this vulnerability through a tactical doctrine that prioritizes the systematic elimination of synapse creatures above nearly all other targets. While other Imperial forces might focus on destroying the largest or most immediately threatening organisms, the Sororitas train to identify and eliminate synapse creatures with ruthless efficiency. This requires a combination of tactical knowledge, precise targeting, and the discipline to ignore more dramatic threats in favor of strategically vital ones. Identifying synapse creatures on a chaotic battlefield filled with dozens of different Tyranid biomorphs is itself a challenging task. The hive mind does not helpfully mark its synapse organisms with identifying symbols. However, the Sisters have developed a sophisticated understanding of Tyranid behavior that allows them to identify these critical targets. Synapse creatures tend to position themselves in locations that maximize their coverage of the swarm, often on elevated terrain or in the center of advancing waves. They move with greater purpose and independence than the organisms around them. They react to battlefield developments with tactical sophistication that lesser organisms lack. The Adepta Sororitas train their warriors to recognize these subtle behavioral cues. Sister Superiors and veteran Battle Sisters can often identify synapse creatures at a glance, picking them out from the swarm through experience and divine guidance. This information is then communicated through the squad's command structure, allowing multiple units to concentrate their fire on priority targets. The precision and coordination with which the Sisters execute these targeting priorities often surprises observers who are used to the more chaotic nature of most Imperial engagements against Tyranids. Once identified, synapse creatures must be eliminated quickly and definitively. This is where the Sisters' emphasis on heavy weapons and sustained firepower proves crucial. A Battle Sister squad might coordinate their bolter fire to suppress a Tyranid warrior, with the squad's Sister Superior using a combi melter to deliver the killing blow. Retributor squads with heavy bolters or multi-melters provide long-range precision fire against hive tyrants and other large synapse organisms. Dominion squads can rapidly redeploy to engage synapse creatures that attempt to reposition, denying the hive mind the flexibility to adapt its synaptic coverage. The results of successfully eliminating synapse creatures can be dramatic and immediate. Historical battle records provide numerous examples of Tyranid assaults collapsing entirely following the death of key synapse organisms. The most famous case, Canoness Praxides' slaying of the hive tyrant on Ocassis, demonstrates the principle at its most extreme. With the death of that single organism, an entire Tyranid assault wave lost cohesion, with the various bioforms either fleeing or turning on each other. The Sisters were able to turn a desperate last stand into a decisive victory through the elimination of a single strategically vital target. But the Sisters of Battle have refined this tactic beyond simply targeting obvious synapse creatures. They have developed sophisticated understanding of how the synaptic web structure changes based on the composition of the swarm and the phase of the assault. During the initial phases of a Tyranid attack, synapse coverage is often redundant and overlapping, making it difficult to create gaps in control. The Sisters counter this by identifying and eliminating the most advanced synapse creatures first, forcing the hive mind to either advance additional synapse organisms into danger or accept a temporary loss of forward coordination. As battles progress and casualties mount on both sides, the Sisters continuously assess and reassess the state of the synaptic web. They look for potential weak points where the elimination of a single synapse creature might create a cascade failure, leaving large portions of the swarm without adequate control. They prioritize targets not just based on immediate threat level, but on strategic importance to maintaining synaptic cohesion. This requires a level of tactical sophistication and battlefield awareness that is remarkable given the chaos of combat against Tyranid swarms. The acts of faith available to the sisters make their synapse hunting capabilities even more effective. When a critical shot against a synapse creature absolutely must connect, a sister can expend a miracle die to ensure her aim is perfect. When a squad needs to reach a position from which they can target a priority synapse organism, they can call upon divine speed to cover the distance. When under heavy fire while engaging a hive tyrant, they can invoke the Shield of Faith to protect them while they complete their mission. These faith-based abilities allow the sisters to execute anti-synapse tactics that would be impossible for conventional forces. There is also evidence that the sisters' faith itself may have a disruptive effect on synaptic bonds. Multiple battlefield reports describe Tyranid organisms near particularly faithful sisters or holy relics becoming sluggish or confused, even while remaining within synapse range. While this effect is not well understood, it suggests that the presence of the Adepta Sororitas may weaken synaptic control beyond the simple mechanical effect of killing synapse creatures. If true, this would represent yet another way in which faith serves as a weapon against the Tyranid menace. The hive mind is aware of how vulnerable its synapse creatures are and takes measures to protect them. Synapse organisms are often heavily armored or given adaptive evolutions that enhance their survivability. They may be screened by waves of lesser organisms or positioned in areas with significant cover. Some hive fleets have even evolved entirely new synapse organisms specifically designed to be difficult to target or kill. Yet despite these adaptations, the Sisters of Battle consistently demonstrate the ability to locate and eliminate synapse creatures with remarkable efficiency. Part of this success stems from the Sisters' willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of their objectives. Where other Imperial forces might withdraw or redirect their efforts when facing heavy resistance, the Sororitas maintain their focus on priority targets with unwavering determination. If eliminating a hive tyrant requires a squad to advance into a killing zone, they advance. If reaching a critical synapse creature necessitates accepting grievous wounds, they accept those wounds. The faith that protects them often allows sisters to accomplish objectives that would result in total casualties for conventional units. The Battle of Holos Borealis, previously mentioned, provides an excellent case study in advanced synapse disruption tactics. The defending sisters analyzed the approaching swarm and identified a complex network of overlapping synapse coverage centered on 3 hive tyrants and numerous Tyranid warriors. Rather than attempting to break this coverage frontally, the sisters used Seraphim squads to conduct rapid strikes against the Tyranid warriors on the flanks of the advance, creating small gaps in synapse coverage. As predicted, the hive mind shifted its remaining warriors to fill these gaps. This created a momentary window where the central hive tyrant lost some of its supporting synapse coverage. Retributor squads that had been held in reserve specifically for this opportunity unleashed coordinated fire that brought down the hive tyrant. The death of this central node caused a cascading failure in the synaptic web, as the remaining synapse creatures were insufficient to maintain control over the entire swarm. This kind of sophisticated, multi-phase tactical execution against a constantly adapting enemy requires not just superior training and equipment, but absolute faith in the plan and in the Emperor's protection. It is this combination of tactical excellence and unshakable faith that makes the Sisters of Battle uniquely effective at breaking the synaptic web. Martyrdom and the blood of saints. In the grim darkness of the far future, death is an ever-present reality. For the Sisters of Battle, however, death is not simply an end to be feared or avoided. It is a potential apotheosis, a chance to join the honored martyrs whose sacrifices inspire countless others to greater acts of devotion and valor. This unique relationship with martyrdom creates a tactical dynamic that the Tyranids, for all their evolutionary sophistication, struggle to counter. The concept of martyrdom is deeply embedded in the spiritual and tactical doctrine of the Adepta Sororitas. From their earliest training, sisters are taught that to die in service to the Emperor is the highest honor any warrior can achieve. They study the lives of the great martyrs of the Imperium, memorizing the details of their sacrifices and the miracles that followed. They understand that their own deaths, if properly executed in the Emperor's service, will strengthen the faith of their surviving sisters and inspire them to even greater acts of heroism. This is not mere empty rhetoric or psychological conditioning, though it certainly serves those purposes. For the Sisters of Battle, martyrdom has genuine power. The death of a sister in combat, particularly if she falls while performing some extraordinary act of faith or valor, generates what the sororitas call miracle dice. These represent the spiritual power released by her ultimate sacrifice, divine favor granted in recognition of her devotion. Her surviving sisters can then channel this power through acts of faith, using the martyr's sacrifice to achieve feats that would otherwise be impossible. The tactical implications of this are profound. Where the death of a squad member in most military forces represents a diminishment of combat effectiveness, for the Sisters of Battle, it can paradoxically increase their power. A sister who falls fighting Tyranids does not die in vain. Her sacrifice literally empowers her sisters to fight more effectively. This creates a situation where the Tyranids' usual strategy of achieving victory through attrition becomes counterproductive. Every sister they kill potentially makes the survivors more dangerous, not less. Consider the Battle of Akassis, where Canoness Praxides achieved martyrdom while slaying a hive tyrant. Her death, rather than breaking the morale of her sisters, drove them into a righteous fury that swept aside the remaining Tyranid forces. The blood of their martyred leader became a rallying cry and a source of spiritual power that manifested as tangible combat bonuses. The sisters fought with such determination and skill, empowered by their Canoness's sacrifice, that they achieved objectives that should have been impossible for their depleted numbers. This phenomenon is not limited to the deaths of high-ranking leaders. Every battle sister who falls in combat contributes to the collective spiritual power available to her order. The blood of martyrs, as the sisters call it, flows through their ranks like a current of divine energy. In battles where casualties are high, this can create a snowball effect where each death makes the survivors progressively more powerful until they achieve levels of combat effectiveness that defy rational explanation. The Hallowed Martyrs Detachment, one of the specialized formations used by the Adepta Sororitas, embodies this principle at the tactical level. These warriors fight with the explicit understanding that their deaths will empower their sisters. Their tactical doctrine actually incorporates planned martyrdom, with certain units accepting dangerous assignments with the expectation that they will not survive, but that their sacrifice will enable the overall victory. This is not reckless expenditure of lives, but calculated use of martyrdom as a force multiplier. For the Tyranids, this creates an impossible tactical situation. They are evolutionarily programmed to overwhelm enemies through superior numbers and attrition. Their entire strategic framework is based on the assumption that inflicting casualties will eventually break enemy resistance. When facing the Sisters of Battle, this assumption proves false. Inflicting casualties on the sororitas can actually make the battle more difficult, as the spiritual power released by martyrdom compensates for or even exceeds the tactical loss of the fallen sisters. The hive mind has no framework for understanding this dynamic. From its perspective, units that have suffered casualties should be weaker and easier to destroy. Yet the sisters consistently demonstrate the opposite pattern, with depleted squads fighting more effectively than they did at full strength. The hive mind can observe this pattern and even predict it after sufficient experience with sororitas forces, but it cannot counter it because the phenomenon operates on spiritual rather than physical principles. There is also the matter of living saints, those paragons of faith who transcend even martyrdom itself. Saint Celestine is the most famous example, a warrior who has been killed and resurrected through divine power on multiple occasions. When a living saint manifests on a battlefield facing Tyranids, the effect is catastrophic for the swarm. These beings radiate an aura of such intense faith that it weakens synaptic bonds, strengthens nearby Imperial forces, and allows them to perform acts of faith with greater frequency and power. The Battle of Cadia's Fall provides a dramatic example of a living saint's effectiveness against Tyranids. When Hive Fleet Leviathan launched opportunistic attacks during the chaos of the 13th Black Crusade, Saint Celestine appeared at several critical junctures. Her presence alone was enough to rally Imperial defenders who had been on the verge of collapse. The Tyranid swarms found themselves facing an enemy who could not be permanently killed, who inspired fanatical resistance in all nearby Imperial forces, and who struck with such power that even Hive tyrants fell before her burning blade. The Hive Mind's usual strategy for dealing with particularly dangerous individual enemies is to overwhelm them with numbers, accepting whatever casualties are necessary to bring down the threat. This approach fails against living saints because even if they are temporarily slain, they can return at unpredictable moments, often at the exact time and place where their presence will be most devastating to Tyranid plans. The biomass expended attempting to kill such beings is wasted when they simply resurrect and continue fighting. Beyond the mechanical effects of martyrdom and resurrection, there is also the psychological impact on other Imperial forces fighting alongside the Sisters. When Astra Militarum regiments see Sisters of Battle accepting death with such serenity and purpose, when they witness martyred sisters empowering their companions to impossible feats, it strengthens their own resolve. The faith of the Sisters becomes contagious, spreading to other Imperial forces and hardening the entire defensive line against Tyranid assault. The Order of Our Martyred Lady, named in honor of Saint Catherine, who was martyred by the witch cult of Menestius, has made this principle central to their entire combat doctrine. Their warriors actively seek martyrdom, not from death wish or nihilism, but from genuine belief that their sacrifice will serve the Emperor's greater purpose. They study the circumstances of their patron saint's death and the miracles that followed, understanding that their own martyrdoms can similarly inspire and empower their sisters. Reports from battles involving the Order of Our Martyred Lady describe phenomena that seem impossible by any rational standard. Sisters with mortal wounds continuing to fight long past the point where death should have claimed them. Entire squads wiped out to the last battle sister, yet somehow achieving their objectives before falling. Martyred canonesses whose final words of encouragement echo across the battlefield hours after their deaths, continuing to inspire their followers. These are not metaphors or propaganda, but documented occurrences witnessed by multiple reliable sources, including inquisitors and Adeptus Mechanicus observers. The Tyranids cannot adapt to this because martyrdom is not a biological trait that can be countered through evolution. It is a spiritual principle that operates entirely outside the hive mind's evolutionary framework. The Great Devourer can evolve creatures that are more difficult to kill, but it cannot prevent the deaths of sisters from empowering their comrades. It can analyze the tactical patterns associated with sororitas martyrdom, but it cannot develop a counter-strategy because the phenomenon is not based on tactics, but on faith. This represents perhaps the most fundamental incompatibility between Tyranids and Sisters of Battle. The Tyranids see death as recycling, a conversion of biomass from one form to another, with no loss of utility to the hive fleet. For the Sisters, death is transformation of a different sort, the conversion of mortal sacrifice into divine power. These two philosophies are irreconcilable, and in their conflict, faith consistently proves superior to mere biology. Discipline against the swarm. Facing a Tyranid swarm is one of the most psychologically challenging experiences in warfare. The sheer number of organisms, the horrifying variety of bioweapons, the alien hunger radiating from the hive mind, all combine to create an experience that breaks the morale of even veteran soldiers. Yet the Sisters of Battle stand unwavering in the face of this horror. Their discipline maintained not through mere training, but through absolute faith that transcends fear. The Adepta Sororitas begins conditioning their warriors against such psychological pressures from their earliest days in the Schola Progenium. Young girls who will one day become battle sisters are exposed to controlled doses of horror and fear, learning to master their emotional responses through prayer and meditation. They study the nature of humanity's enemies, understanding that knowledge reduces fear. Most importantly, they are taught that fear itself is a test of faith, an opportunity to demonstrate absolute trust in the Emperor's protection. This training creates warriors with an unusual psychological profile, where Astra Militarum soldiers might maintain discipline through obedience to chain of command and fear of commissars, where Space Marines overcome fear through genetic conditioning and chemical enhancement of their neurology. The Sisters of Battle achieve fearlessness through genuine faith. They do not suppress their fear responses. They transcend them by placing absolute trust in the Emperor's plan. If they live, it is because the Emperor wills their survival. If they die, it is because the Emperor calls them to martyrdom. Either outcome is acceptable, which eliminates the fear that cripples lesser warriors. This fearlessness is not recklessness. The Sisters are not careless with their lives or dismissive of danger. Rather, they can assess tactical situations with perfect clarity, undistorted by panic or dread. When a Carnifex charges their position, they do not freeze in terror, but calmly calculate the optimal moment to fire their melter gun. When swarms of Hormagaunts threaten to overwhelm their lines, they do not break and run, but adjust their formation and concentration of fire to create maximum casualties before the assault hits. The discipline displayed by the Sororitas in combat extends to their tactical coordination and execution. Battle Sister squads move with precision, even under the most chaotic battlefield conditions. They maintain formation integrity when lesser troops would scatter. They execute complex tactical maneuvers that require absolute trust in one's squad mates and perfect timing. This level of coordination is particularly important when fighting Tyranids, whose swarms seek to engulf and isolate enemy units. Consider a typical engagement between a Battle Sister squad and a mixed Tyranid force. As the swarm approaches, the Sisters do not simply open fire indiscriminately. The Sister Superior designates priority targets, typically synapse creatures or particularly dangerous organisms. The squad concentrates its fire in coordinated volleys, designed to overwhelm even heavily armored targets. Between volleys, they chant battle hymns that strengthen their faith and coordination. When the swarm closes to melee range, they shift seamlessly to close combat weapons without panic or confusion. This discipline is maintained even when circumstances would justify panic. Sisters have been documented maintaining perfect fire discipline while being literally overrun by Tyranid organisms, continuing to chant battle hymns even as bioweapons dissolve their armor, and executing complex tactical maneuvers while suffering casualties that would cause other units to break and flee. This is possible because their faith provides an anchor point that emotional trauma cannot dislodge. The contrast with other Imperial forces is often stark. Astra Militarum regiments facing the same Tyranid assaults might suffer mass desertions or require commissars to execute soldiers pour encourager les autres. Even Space Marines, with their genetically enhanced psychology, can experience moments of doubt or hesitation when faced with particularly horrifying Tyranid organisms. The Sisters of Battle simply do not waver. Their hymns continue uninterrupted. Their formation holds. Their fire discipline remains perfect. This unshakable discipline creates significant tactical problems for the Tyranids. The hive mind's standard approach to overwhelming defenders relies on inducing panic and chaos. Swarms of small organisms attack from multiple directions simultaneously, seeking to fragment defensive formations and create pockets of isolated troops that can be eliminated piecemeal. larger organisms like carnifexes and tyrannifexes serve as terror weapons. Their massive size and fearsome bioweapons designed to break enemy morale as much as their physical defenses. Against the Sisters of Battle, these tactics fail. The swarms attack from multiple directions and find every angle covered by disciplined fire. The terror weapons lumber forward and are systematically destroyed by concentrated melter and lascannon fire without inducing panic. The hive mind finds itself fighting an enemy that refuses to behave according to predicted patterns of morale degradation and psychological collapse. The Adepta Sororitas also demonstrates remarkable discipline in their logistics and tactical preparation. When deploying to face a Tyranid threat, they do not rush into battle unprepared. They study whatever intelligence is available about the specific hive fleet they will face, noting its evolutionary adaptations and typical tactics. They consecrate their weapons and armor through proper religious rites. They establish clear chains of command and contingency plans. Most importantly, they pray, individually and collectively, preparing their spirits for the trials ahead. During extended campaigns against Tyranids, this discipline prevents the gradual erosion of combat effectiveness that plagues other Imperial forces. Astra Militarum regiments might suffer declining morale as casualties mount and hope of victory fades. Space Marine companies might see their tactical flexibility diminish as attrition reduces their numbers. The Sisters of Battle, if anything, become more effective as campaigns progress, their faith strengthened by every martyrdom and every hard-won victory. There are documented cases of individual battle sisters continuing to fight effectively for days without rest, sustained by faith alone when their bodies should have collapsed from exhaustion. Entire convents have maintained sieges against Tyranid forces for weeks or months, never wavering in their defense, even as food supplies dwindled and reinforcements failed to arrive. This endurance stems from discipline rooted in faith, rather than mere physical stamina. The Order of the Argent Shroud demonstrates this principle particularly well. Known for their rapid deployment and relentless pursuit of the enemy, the Order maintains such perfect discipline that they can conduct complex tactical operations at speeds that would cause other forces to lose cohesion. When facing Tyranid swarms, this allows them to execute hit-and-run tactics that deny the hive mind the chance to adapt to their methods. Even in defeat, the discipline of the Sisters serves the Emperor's purposes. When a sororitas position is finally overrun despite their best efforts, they do not surrender or flee in panic. They fight to the last sister, selling their lives as dearly as possible and ensuring that as many Tyranid organisms as possible are destroyed or rendered unrecoverable through flame. The biomass cost of eliminating a sororitas strongpoint often exceeds the value the hive fleet might have gained by capturing it intact. This discipline extends to their interactions with other Imperial forces. When the Sisters of Battle are part of a larger defensive effort, they often serve as a stabilizing influence on less reliable elements of the army. Their unwavering faith and unshakable discipline can inspire nearby Astra Militarum units to stand firm when they might otherwise break. Their presence often shames more prideful allies, such as Space Marines, who might have been considering tactical withdrawals, into maintaining their positions. The hive mind can recognize this pattern, but cannot effectively counter it because it operates on fundamentally different principles than the Tyranids. The Great Devourer understands fear as a survival mechanism and morale as a measurable variable that can be degraded through specific stimuli. It cannot comprehend warriors whose morale is completely divorced from physical circumstances, who draw their determination from an invisible deity rather than tangible realities. This incomprehension leads the hive mind to continue employing psychological warfare tactics that simply do not work against the sororitas, wasting resources that could be better utilized elsewhere. The Holy Trinity of weapons. The Adepta Sororitas recognizes three categories of weapons as particularly blessed in the Emperor's sight: the bolter, which delivers his judgment; the flamer,
which enacts his purification, and the melter, which brings his wrath. Together, these comprise what the sisters call the Holy Trinity of weapons, and they are employed with devastating effectiveness against Tyranid swarms. The bolter, that ubiquitous weapon of the Imperium's elite forces, takes on special significance when wielded by the Sisters of Battle. Each bolt round fired by a sister is blessed before battle, consecrated through prayer and ritual anointing. While skeptics might dismiss this as mere superstition, battlefield reports consistently show that sororitas bolters achieve higher accuracy and penetration rates than equivalent weapons used by other Imperial forces. Whether this reflects divine intervention, superior training, or some combination of both is irrelevant to the practical result. Sisters of Battle kill more efficiently with their bolters than other warriors. Against Tyranids, the bolter's mass-reactive rounds prove particularly effective. The armor-piercing tips allow the rounds to penetrate Tyranid chitin, after which the explosive core detonates, causing massive internal damage. Smaller organisms like termagants and hormagaunts are killed reliably with single shots. Larger organisms like Tyranid warriors require multiple hits, but are still vulnerable to concentrated bolter fire. Even massive creatures like carnifexes can be brought down if enough bolter fire is applied to their weak points. The sisters employ bolters with a discipline and precision that maximizes their effectiveness. Rather than engaging in sustained automatic fire that quickly depletes ammunition, they use controlled bursts or single shots, each aimed at specific targets. Sister superiors coordinate their squad's fire to focus on priority targets, ensuring that bolter rounds are not wasted on organisms that are already mortally wounded or that present minimal threat. This fire discipline allows battle sister squads to maintain sustained combat effectiveness throughout prolonged engagements. Specialized bolter ammunition further enhances the weapon's utility against Tyranids. Blessed bolt rounds, which have received particular intensive consecration, burn with holy fire upon impact and are especially effective at preventing Tyranid regeneration. Inferno bolts, loaded with specialized incendiary compounds, help ensure that slain Tyranids are cremated rather than reclaimed. Kraken bolts sacrifice some explosive power for increased armor penetration, allowing sisters to engage heavily armored bioforms at range. The flamer, as previously discussed, serves as the primary tool of purification in the sororitas arsenal. But beyond its strategic value in denying biomass to the hive fleet, flamers also provide critical tactical advantages in close-quarters combat with Tyranid swarms. The sweeping gout of blessed promethium from a flamer can incinerate dozens of small organisms in a single burst. It requires no precision aim, making it effective even in the chaos of melee combat. And it creates a psychological barrier, as even Tyranid organisms seem to instinctively recoil from flames. Battle sister squads typically include at least one flamer among their number, providing the ability to clear Tyranid organisms from confined spaces or deal with sudden close-range assaults. Dominion squads, specialized in rapid response and aggressive tactics, often equip multiple flamers to maximize their ability to purge Tyranid infiltrator organisms. Retributor squads may include heavy flamers, massive weapons that project promethium across wider areas and at greater distances than standard flamers. The heavy flamer deserves special mention for its effectiveness against Tyranid swarms. This weapon can sweep entire corridors or trenches clear of organisms, creating barriers of flame that the swarm cannot easily cross. In urban warfare, or within the confines of hive cities, heavy flamers become absolute force multipliers. A single retributor with a heavy flamer, positioned at a choke point, can hold back a Tyranid assault wave almost indefinitely, incinerating organisms as quickly as they can advance through the flames. The sisters also employ specialized flame weapons like hand flamers and inferno pistols. Hand flamers allow even rank-and-file battle sisters to engage in purification duties, burning Tyranid organisms in close combat, or ensuring corpses are properly cremated. Inferno pistols, essentially short-range melter weapons. Combine the purifying power of flame with the penetrating power of thermal energy, capable of vaporizing even heavily armored Tyranid organisms at point-blank range. Melter weapons represent the third pillar of the Holy Trinity, bringing the Emperor's wrath in the form of superheated thermal beams. These weapons generate such intense heat that they can reduce any substance to vapor almost instantaneously. Against Tyranids, melter weapons are the preferred tool for eliminating large, heavily armored organisms and critical synapse creatures. The multi-melter, a heavy weapon variant, can destroy a Carnifex with a single well-placed shot. Melter bombs allow sisters in close combat to eliminate even Tyranid biotitans by attaching them to critical points and melting through layers of chitin and reinforced carapace. The Exorcist tank, a signature vehicle of the Adepta Sororitas, mounts an Exorcist missile launcher that can fire blessed warheads with both explosive and thermal properties, effectively combining the benefits of artillery with melter-like penetrating power. Melter guns serve as the standard anti-armor weapon for Battle Sister squads. Dominion squads often field multiple melter guns to maximize their ability to eliminate large Tyranid organisms quickly. The relatively short range of melter weapons, typically less than half that of equivalent bolters, requires sisters wielding them to display exceptional courage, closing to near suicidal distances to ensure their shots are most effective. This is another area where the sisters' fearlessness proves crucial. They advance into melter range without hesitation, trusting in their faith and armor to protect them long enough to take their shots. The tactical doctrine surrounding the Holy Trinity emphasizes combined arms effectiveness. A typical Battle Sister squad facing a Tyranid assault might employ their bolters at maximum range to thin the approaching swarm, preserving their limited special weapons ammunition for priority targets. As the swarm closes, flamers sweep away the smaller organisms, while melter guns and blessed bolts target larger threats like Tyranid warriors. If the swarm reaches melee range, the sisters seamlessly transition to chainswords and power weapons, continuing to fight with the same discipline and coordination they displayed at range. Retributor squads, the heavy weapons specialists of the Sororitas, take this combined arms approach to its extreme. A single Retributor squad might include a mix of heavy bolters for sustained anti-infantry fire, multi-melters for eliminating large organisms, and heavy flamers for area denial and purification. This allows them to respond to whatever threats the Tyranid swarm presents, shifting their fire as the tactical situation demands. The superior training and faith of the sisters allows them to coordinate this diverse array of weaponry with a precision that dedicated heavy weapons teams from other Imperial forces often cannot match. The blessed nature of Sororitas weapons also appears to have effects beyond mere physical damage. There are numerous reports of Tyranid organisms seeming to react with what could almost be described as pain or fear when struck by consecrated weapons. While Tyranids are not known to experience such emotions in any normal sense, the blessed weapons of the sisters seem to cause disruption at a level beyond simple tissue damage. Some tech priests theorize that the faith-based blessings imbued into these weapons create a disruption in the psychic bonds that connect Tyranid organisms to the hive mind, though this remains unproven speculation. The sisters also make extensive use of blessed ammunition, promethium fuel, and other supplies that have been consecrated through religious rites before deployment. Whether through actual divine intervention or through the psychosomatic effects of the sisters' absolute belief in these rituals' efficacy, the practical result is that Sororitas weapons consistently perform above their theoretical specifications. Bolters jam less. Frequently, flamers burn hotter and longer. Melter weapons achieve more consistent penetration. These marginal improvements compound over the course of extended engagements to create significant tactical advantages. The Holy Trinity also extends to vehicles and heavy equipment. Immolator tanks mount twin-linked heavy flamers, creating mobile platforms for purification operations. Exorcist tanks fire blessed missiles that combine explosive power with flame and faith. Even simple rhino transports, when operated by the sororitas, are blessed and consecrated, making them more reliable and durable than equivalent vehicles in other Imperial forces. The hive mind has attempted to evolve specific countermeasures to the weapons of the Holy Trinity. Some Tyranid organisms have developed enhanced thermal resistance to better withstand flamers and melter weapons. Others have grown thicker chitin specifically designed to defeat bolter rounds. Yet these adaptations consistently prove insufficient when facing the Adepta Sororitas, likely because the blessed nature of their weapons allows them to overcome purely physical defenses. The Sisters' faith apparently grants their weapons properties that biological evolution cannot adequately counter. Faith, unshaken by horror. The psychological dimension of warfare against Tyranids cannot be overstated. The sheer alienness of the organisms, the horrifying efficiency with which they consume all life, the psychic pressure of the shadow in the warp, pressing down on the minds of defenders, all combine to create an experience that can break even the most hardened veterans. Yet the Sisters of Battle stand unwavering, their faith providing perfect immunity to the despair that the hive mind seeks to inspire. The Tyranids are creatures of pure nightmare-made flesh. Hormagaunts scuttle forward on too many legs, their razor-sharp claws capable of disemboweling a human with a single swipe. Carnifexes lumber through defensive lines like living battering rams, crushing soldiers beneath their massive bulk. Lictors hunt from the shadows with an intelligence that makes them seem almost malevolent rather than merely bestial. The variety of Tyranid organisms seems limitless, each more horrifying than the last, each specifically evolved to kill in the most efficient manner possible. For ordinary humans, simply witnessing a Tyranid swarm can induce crippling fear. Astra Militarum soldiers have been known to freeze in terror at the sight of an approaching Tyranid assault wave. Some simply break and run, their survival instincts overriding military discipline. Others fire wildly and ineffectively, their aim disrupted by trembling hands and panic-clouded minds. Even Space Marines, warriors who have faced demons and traitor legions without flinching, can experience moments of doubt when confronted with the utterly alien nature of the Tyranid threat. The Sisters of Battle experience none of this. When they look upon Tyranid swarms, they do not see creatures to be feared, but Xenos abominations to be purged in the Emperor's name. Where others see nightmare organisms that violate every natural law, the Sisters see validation of their faith. If the galaxy contains such horrors, surely the Emperor's protection is all the more necessary and precious. Each Tyranid they face becomes not a source of fear, but an opportunity to demonstrate their devotion through righteous violence. This immunity to fear stems from the absolute nature of the Sisters' faith. They genuinely believe, with the kind of certainty that admits no doubt, that the Emperor watches over them and will protect them so long as they remain faithful. If they die, it is because the Emperor has deemed it time for them to join him, and martyrdom is the highest honor they can achieve. This mindset eliminates the fear of death that underlies most psychological trauma in combat. The shadow in the warp, that terrible psychic pressure that drives psychers mad and fills ordinary soldiers with creeping dread, has minimal effect on the Sisters of Battle. Their shield of faith protects their minds from the worst of the hive mind's psychic assault. Where Astra Militarum soldiers report feeling crushing despair and existential meaninglessness as the shadow descends, Battle Sisters feel only the warm certainty of the Emperor's love. The alien psychic presence that should terrify them instead strengthens their faith by highlighting the necessity of their holy mission. This creates a situation where the Tyranid's most powerful psychological weapon is completely neutralized. The hive mind projects the shadow in the warp specifically to demoralize and weaken defenders before the physical assault begins. Against the Sisters of Battle, this weapon not only fails, but arguably backfires, as the Sisters interpret its presence as validation that they face a worthy enemy deserving of their full righteous fury. The physical manifestations of Tyranid horror are similarly ineffective against the Sororitas. When a lictor emerges from hiding to eviscerate an isolated sister, she does not panic or flee, but responds with precise bolter fire and prayer. When bioweapons spray acid across a battle sister squad, they do not break formation, but maintain their coordinated fire while calling upon the Emperor's protection. When a Tyrannifex's bioelectric discharge should send soldiers fleeing in terror, the sisters simply redirect their melter fire toward this new priority target. There is even evidence that the sisters' faith actively diminishes the psychological impact of Tyranid organisms on nearby Imperial forces. Astra Militarum soldiers fighting alongside battle sisters report feeling less fear than they do in other circumstances. The hymns sung by the sisters as they advance into combat seem to strengthen resolve and banish doubt. This creates a force multiplication effect, where the presence of even a small number of sisters can stabilize larger formations of less reliable troops. Canoness Palmiro of the Order of the Ebon Chalice famously articulated this principle in her rallying cry before the Battle of Sextus Threshold. "We are beset by many terrible foes in these dark times, but we walk in the light of the Emperor, and we shall not let a single foe stay us from our duty." This statement encapsulates the sisters' approach to facing horrifying enemies. They acknowledge the terror of their foes, but place faith above fear, duty above self-preservation. The Order of the Sacred Rose demonstrates this principle through their emphasis on tactical precision and coordinated firepower. When facing Tyranid swarms that would send other forces reeling, they maintain perfect fire discipline, each sister executing her assigned role without hesitation, despite the horror advancing toward her. This requires not just courage, but a complete transcendence of fear, possible only through absolute faith. There are documented instances of individual sisters achieving states of what can only be described as divine ecstasy during combat against Tyranids. Sister Repentia, Emilia, of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, reportedly laughed while fighting a Carnifex. So certain was she of the Emperor's protection, and so joyous at the opportunity to prove her faith through combat. This kind of response is incomprehensible to the hive mind, which understands fear and self-preservation as fundamental to all life, but cannot grasp the concept of warriors who welcome death as martyrdom. The sisters' immunity to horror extends even to the consumption process itself. Tyranid swarms exist to consume all biological matter, breaking it down into biomass for the hive fleet. For most humans, the knowledge that defeat means being dissolved alive by digestive acids or consumed by ravenous organisms is terrifying. The sisters accept this possibility with equanimity, secure in the knowledge that their immortal souls will go to the Emperor, regardless of what happens to their mortal remains. This creates yet another tactical problem for the hive mind. The psychological terror of consumption, which helps break enemy resistance and cause panicked retreats, does not work against Sisters of Battle. They fight with the same determination, whether facing simple execution or horrific consumption. The biomass cost of defeating them does not decrease, even as victory becomes inevitable, because the sisters will not surrender or flee, but will continue fighting to the last warrior. The sisters also display remarkable psychological resilience during extended campaigns against Tyranids, where other Imperial forces might suffer declining morale as casualties mount and the strategic situation deteriorates. The sisters maintain or even increase their faith-based determination. Each martyrdom strengthens the resolve of the survivors. Each narrow victory is interpreted as a miracle, validating their faith. Even in defeat, they find spiritual meaning that sustains them through subsequent engagements.
This psychological endurance allows the sisters to conduct campaigns that would break other forces. They can maintain sieges for months against overwhelming Tyranid numbers, never wavering in their defense. They can conduct desperate counterattacks against superior forces without hesitation. They can accept horrific casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives without their morale collapsing. This makes them ideal defenders for critical positions where defeat would be catastrophic. The hive mind can recognize that psychological warfare is ineffective against the sisters of battle, but it lacks the flexibility to fundamentally alter its approach. The shadow in the warp and the horrifying appearance of Tyranid organisms are intrinsic to the species, not optional tactics that can be modified based on the enemy. The hive mind must therefore accept that when facing the Adepta Sororitas, it is fighting an enemy that simply will not break, no matter how desperate the situation becomes. Notable battles and victories. The historical record of conflicts between the Adepta Sororitas and Tyranid hive fleets provides numerous examples of battles where faith proved decisive. While the martyrdom of Canoness Praxides on Ocassis remains the most famous instance, it represents merely one engagement in a much larger pattern of Sororitas effectiveness against the Great Devourer. The defense of Ocassis during the Second Tyrannic War set a template that would be repeated across countless worlds. When Hive Fleet Kraken descended upon the Cardinal World, Canoness Praxides arrived with reinforcements from the Order of Our Martyred Lady. Rather than attempting to evacuate immediately, she organized a defensive strategy centered on buying time for civilian evacuation, while denying the Tyranids any opportunity to reclaim biomass from their casualties. The initial Tyranid assault wave encountered precisely coordinated fire from Retributor squads and Exorcist tanks. The sisters had established overlapping fields of fire that allowed them to concentrate their heavy weapons on priority targets, while ensuring that killed organisms were quickly incinerated by flamer teams. The first wave was obliterated before it could breach the cathedral's fortress walls, with nearly complete denial of biomass reclamation. The second wave, however, achieved a breach through sheer weight of numbers. As Tyranid organisms poured through the gap, Praxides led a counterattack directly into their midst. Her faith and tactical acumen allowed her to identify the assault's command organism, a massive hive tyrant directing the swarm. She engaged it in single combat, even after receiving wounds that should have been instantly fatal. The mechanics of her victory deserve examination. Praxides' power mace struck the hive tyrant's skull with such force that it caved in the creature's reinforced cranium, despite the armor that should have deflected the blow. Witnesses reported that the weapon seemed to burn with holy light at the moment of impact. Whether this represented an act of faith manifesting through the weapon, or simply the force of Praxides' conviction, is unknowable, but the effect was undeniable. With the hive tyrant's death, the swarm lost not just synaptic coordination, but seemed to experience active confusion and disorientation. Tyranid organisms began attacking each other, turning the assault into cannibalistic chaos. The sisters pressed their advantage with a fury born of their canoness's martyrdom, eliminating the remaining Tyranids and securing enough time for thousands of civilians to evacuate Ocassis before the planet fell to subsequent Tyranid waves. The Battle of the Thresh system provides another illuminating case study. Sister Assumpta of the Order of the Bloody Rose received visions warning of a Tyranid incursion into the system. Acting on these prophetic insights, the Order deployed to the system's sole planet, a barren world that seemed to have no strategic value. The sisters established defensive positions and waited, a decision that baffled Imperial commanders who questioned why valuable Sororitas forces were being positioned on a worthless rock. When a tendril of Hive Fleet Ouroboros entered the system, the reasoning became clear. The Tyranids, detecting the biomass represented by the sisters themselves, descended upon the planet en masse. They found themselves facing an enemy that had prepared the battlefield specifically to maximize the effectiveness of flame weapons. The barren terrain offered no cover for approaching organisms. Pre-positioned ammunition dumps ensured the sisters would not run out of promethium. Every defensive position had been blessed and consecrated through days of ritual preparation. The battle that followed was a masterclass in anti-Tyranid warfare. The sisters used their mobility to maintain optimal range from the swarm, never allowing themselves to be fixed in position where they could be overwhelmed. They concentrated their fire on synapse creatures with disciplined precision, creating gaps in synaptic coverage that fragmented the swarm's cohesion. Most critically, they ensured that every single Tyranid casualty was incinerated, denying the Hive fleet any return on its biomass investment. The casualties on both sides were horrific. Entire preceptories of the Bloody Rose were reduced to a handful of survivors. But the Tyranid losses were worse, measured not just in organisms destroyed, but in biomass permanently denied to the Hive fleet. When the last Tyranid organism was finally purged, the sisters had achieved something remarkable. They had not merely defeated a Tyranid assault, but had inflicted a net biomass loss on Hive fleet Ouroboros. The tendril that attacked the Thresh system emerged weaker than when it entered, a rare occurrence in Tyranid warfare. The defense of Periramunda offers a more tragic but equally instructive example. The entire convent on this world was ordered by Inquisitor Killian to participate in the excommunicate traitoris of their own planet. Torn between loyalty to the Inquisition and the knowledge that many of those they were condemning were innocent, the sisters chose obedience to imperial authority. When Tyranid Hive fleet forces subsequently attacked the planet, the sisters saw it as divine punishment for their role in the deaths of innocents. Rather than evacuating, they chose to stand and fight, seeking atonement through martyrdom. The entire convent died to the last sister, but in doing so, they inflicted casualties on the Tyranids, far out of proportion to their numbers. Their faith, heightened by their desire for redemption, manifested in acts of faith of unusual power and frequency. They fought with a determination that bordered on the supernatural, each sister seeking to earn forgiveness through the ultimate sacrifice. The Tyranids eventually overran the convent, but at a cost that made the victory Pyrrhic. The biomass gained from the planet was barely sufficient to replace the losses suffered in conquering it. More importantly, the sisters' last stand bought time for other imperial forces to prepare defenses elsewhere, ultimately contributing to the containment of that Tyranid incursion. The Third War for Armageddon, primarily remembered for the Orc invasion led by Gazkul Thraka, also saw significant Tyranid activity that was countered by the presence of the Orders of the Argent Shroud and our Martyred Lady. While fighting a multi-front war against both Orcs and Tyranids, these orders demonstrated exceptional versatility and effectiveness. They could shift from facing one Xenos threat to another without losing effectiveness, their faith-based abilities proving equally potent against both species. The Battle of St. Capelline's Cathedral exemplifies this flexibility. When a Tyranid splinter group attempted to take advantage of the chaos created by the Orc invasion, they found the cathedral defended by a mixed force, including sisters of both orders. The sisters coordinated their defense with precision, despite coming from different orders with slightly different tactical doctrines. They held the cathedral for 6 days against continuous Tyranid assault, their ammunition stocks replenished by miraculous discoveries of cached supplies that no one could remember storing. On the 6th day, when it seemed the position must finally fall, St. Celestine herself appeared, her presence rallying not just the sisters, but all imperial forces in the region. The living saint's intervention turned the tide, her flaming sword cutting through Hive tyrants, and her very presence disrupting synaptic bonds across the entire Tyranid assault force. The Xenos were driven back, in complete disarray, many organisms reverting to animalistic behavior, even while still technically within synapse range. The defense of Holos Borealis, mentioned earlier, demonstrated the Sororitas' ability to conduct sophisticated anti-synapse operations. The attacking Hive fleet had adapted its tactics based on previous encounters with Imperial forces, maintaining redundant synapse coverage.
and positioning its synapse creatures defensively. The Sisters countered with a multi-phase operation that systematically identified and eliminated synapse creatures in a specific sequence designed to create cascading failures in the synaptic web. This required not just tactical acumen, but also absolute faith in the battle plan and in each other. Units had to accept dangerous assignments, knowing that their success was critical to the overall strategy. Seraphim squads conducted high-risk strikes against Tyranid warriors, accepting casualties to create the necessary gaps in synapse coverage. Retributor squads held their fire until exactly the right moment, trusting that their sisters would create the openings they needed. The entire operation depended on precise timing and coordination possible only through shared faith and mutual trust. Recent engagements during the era Indomitus have seen the Sisters of Battle continuing to demonstrate effectiveness against Tyranid threats. During the Plague Wars, when the Imperium Nihilus found itself isolated by the Great Rift, Sororitas forces proved instrumental in defending multiple worlds against opportunistic Tyranid incursions. Cut off from easy reinforcement and facing enemies on multiple fronts, the Sisters maintained their effectiveness through faith alone, achieving victories that rational analysis would deem impossible. These battles and many others establish a clear pattern. When Sisters of Battle engage Tyranids in significant numbers, they consistently achieve results that defy predictions based on their relatively limited numbers and non-enhanced physiology. They inflict disproportionate casualties, deny biomass reclamation through systematic cremation of Tyranid organisms, and maintain cohesion under circumstances that would break other Imperial forces. This pattern has not gone unnoticed by the hive mind, which increasingly attempts to avoid or minimize engagements with Sororitas forces when viable alternatives exist. Conclusion: why Tyranids should fear the Sisters. The evidence presented throughout this examination leads to an inescapable conclusion. The Sisters of Battle represent a unique and particularly dangerous threat to Tyranid hive fleets. This threat stems not from any single factor, but from a convergence of capabilities, doctrines, and faith-based phenomena that collectively exploit fundamental weaknesses in the Tyranid species. At the strategic level, the Sisters' emphasis on denying biomass to the enemy through systematic cremation of casualties undermines the Tyranids' entire operational model. Hive fleets advance through the galaxy by consuming worlds and recycling that biomass into additional organisms and fuel for their bioships. When facing Sororitas forces, this recycling becomes impossible. The flames that purge Xenos corruption ensure that every Tyranid organism killed represents a permanent loss to the hive fleet. Over the course of extended campaigns, this attrition becomes unsustainable. The Tyranids must commit ever-increasing resources to achieve diminishing returns, eventually reaching a point where victory costs more than it gains. At the tactical level, the Sisters possess an almost perfect counter to the Tyranid command and control system. Their immunity to the shadow in the warp negates the hive mind's primary psychological weapon. Their precision targeting and combined arms doctrine makes them exceptionally effective at identifying and eliminating synapse creatures. Their discipline prevents them from succumbing to the panic that usually follows when defensive lines are breached by Tyranid swarms. Each of these capabilities individually would be valuable. Together, they create a force specifically suited to breaking Tyranid assaults. At the spiritual level, the Sisters wield weapons that the hive mind simply cannot comprehend or counter. Acts of faith operate on principles entirely outside the Tyranids' evolutionary framework. These manifestations of divine power, or whatever they actually represent, allow the Sisters to achieve impossible victories through miracles that defy both biology and physics. The hive mind can observe these phenomena, can even predict their general likelihood based on battlefield circumstances, but cannot develop effective countermeasures because it lacks the conceptual framework to understand what it is countering. The psychology of the Sisters also creates insurmountable problems for the Tyranids. where other Imperial forces can be ground down through attrition and psychological warfare. The sororitas become more dangerous as battles progress. Martyrdom strengthens rather than weakens their forces. Desperation empowers rather than cripples them. The usual mechanisms by which the hive mind achieves victory, overwhelming numbers, and the gradual erosion of enemy morale, are ineffective against warriors whose faith renders them immune to despair. The cumulative effect of these factors is that engaging Sisters of Battle represents a poor allocation of resources from the Tyranids' perspective. The biomass cost of eliminating sororitas positions exceeds the biomass that can be reclaimed afterward. The tactical challenges posed by their anti-synapse doctrine means that hive fleets must commit disproportionate resources to overcome them. The psychological immunity of the Sisters means that standard terror tactics provide no benefit. In purely pragmatic terms, the Tyranids would be better served avoiding the Sisters of Battle and seeking easier prey. Yet the Sisters ensure they cannot be easily avoided. They deploy to threatened worlds, specifically to face the Tyranid menace. They seek out hive fleet tendrils and engage them proactively. They position themselves at critical junctures where the Tyranids have no choice but to either fight them or abandon strategic objectives. The Adepta Sororitas makes itself into an obstacle that hive fleets cannot simply bypass. This creates a situation unique in the Tyranids' galactic conquest. Against nearly every other species and faction, the hive mind can calculate odds, adapt its organisms, and eventually overwhelm resistance through superior numbers and evolutionary advantages. Against the Sisters of Battle, these approaches fail. Evolution cannot counter miracles. Numbers cannot overcome faith. Adaptation cannot respond to enemies that operate on principles the hive mind cannot even perceive. There is also the question of what the Sisters represent in the larger strategic picture. The Tyranids seek to consume all life in the galaxy, reducing everything to biomass for the hive fleets. They represent materialist biology taken to its logical extreme, life as pure consumption and reproduction without higher meaning or purpose. The Sisters of Battle are the diametric opposite of this philosophy. They live not for consumption, but for faith. Their purpose is not biological, but spiritual. They willingly sacrifice the biomass of their own bodies for causes that have no material benefit. When these two philosophies meet on the battlefield, the conflict transcends mere military engagement to become something approaching metaphysical struggle. The Tyranids seek to prove that life is nothing more than biological processes, that consciousness is merely a survival adaptation, that existence has no meaning beyond reproduction and consumption. The Sisters prove through their very existence and their impossible victories that consciousness transcends biology, that faith is more powerful than evolution, and that spiritual conviction can overcome material reality. The hive mind, for all its vast intelligence, may lack the capacity to understand what it faces in the Adepta Sororitas. It can observe their effectiveness, calculate their threat level, and attempt to minimize engagements with them. But it cannot truly comprehend warriors who derive their power from devotion to an invisible deity, who become stronger through sacrifice, and who achieve victories through miracles that violate every natural law the hive mind understands. This incomprehension is itself a weakness. Against enemies it understands, the hive mind can adapt and overcome. Against the Sisters of Battle, it cannot even begin to formulate an effective counter-strategy, because doing so would require understanding faith, and faith operates on principles fundamentally alien to the Tyranid species. The Sisters exploit not just tactical and strategic weaknesses in the Tyranid approach to warfare, but a conceptual blind spot in the hive mind's very nature. As hive fleets continue their inexorable advance into the galaxy, they will inevitably encounter more Sisters of Battle. Each engagement will cost the Tyranids more biomass than they can reclaim. Each battle will demonstrate that there exist forces in the universe that biological evolution cannot overcome. And slowly, through accumulated experience and catastrophic losses, the hive mind is learning what its countless victims already know. Faith is a weapon more terrible than any claw or bioweapon, and those who wield it with absolute conviction are the most dangerous foes imaginable. The Tyranids do not experience fear in any way humans would recognize. They are driven by hunger and evolutionary imperatives, not emotions. Yet, if the hive mind possessed the capacity for fear, it would fear the Sisters of Battle, not because of their weapons or their numbers, but because they represent something the Tyranids cannot consume, cannot assimilate, and cannot defeat through the evolutionary processes that have allowed them to dominate countless galaxies. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Sisters of Battle stand as proof that faith endures. They demonstrate that the human spirit, when properly tempered through devotion and training, can stand against horrors that would drive other warriors mad. They show that there exist powers in the universe that transcend mere biology and physics. And in doing so, they become the one enemy the Tyranids cannot adapt to overcome. This is why the Great Devourer should fear the daughters of the Emperor, not because they can single-handedly stop the Tyranid advance, but because they prove that the Tyranids' fundamental approach to existence, consumption, and evolution has limits that faith does not. In the eternal struggle between material existence and spiritual conviction, the Sisters of Battle demonstrate which force truly holds greater power. As you've journeyed through this exploration of why the Tyranids fear the Sisters of Battle, I hope you've gained new appreciation for these incredible warriors. Their victories are not accidents or narrative conveniences, but the logical result of faith wielded as a weapon against an enemy that cannot comprehend it. The Emperor protects, and nowhere is that protection more evident than when his most devoted daughters take to the battlefield against the Xenos hordes. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There's so much more to explore in the grim darkness of the far future, and your support helps make these detailed examinations possible. Until next time, remember, in faith there is strength, in martyrdom there is victory, and in the righteous fury of the Adepta Sororitas, there is hope for humanity's survival against even the most terrible of foes.